Well, a very good day, everyone, and a warm welcome to the side sessions of the third UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. This session is going to focus on Indigenous voices, transforming business operations in Indigenous territories, and it is hosted by IPRI and AIPP. This is one of several side sessions leading up to the plenary forum on March 28th to 30th in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Just a quick note that this session is being recorded and that we are also live on YouTube. So we're so glad to have you here. Just as a first note, we do have interpretation available. And so if you'd like to access interpretation, you should find an interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, and you could click that, select your language, and mute the original language. And this is also useful even if you're speaking English, because we will have some people speaking other languages as part of this session. So that's number one. Number two is we do ask that you turn on your webcam when you speak, if you can. If you join us for part of the Q&A, if you have a comment that you're making, or if you're one of the speakers, we do ask that you turn on your webcam so that we can see each other as part of this session. It would be great if you could do that. Now, for any comments or questions, or if you'd like to share a thought, there's always the chat. That is also on the bottom of your screen. You should have access to the chat button where you can add comments or questions. And you can also raise your hand if you'd like to speak. So under the reactions button, you will find this raise hand feature. So that's a little bit to get us started. Moderating this session is the fantastic Joan Carling, who is the Global Executive Director for Indigenous Peoples Rights International, IPRI. So Joan, I'm passing the floor over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that call. Just so to add a bit of a context to this discussion on transforming business operations in Indigenous territories, we know that Indigenous peoples are most impacted by business operations. And if we take a look at the in South Asia, it has actually a majority of Indigenous peoples with more than 150 million only in South Asia. So that's already a very big part of Indigenous peoples that are affected by business and human rights. Now, the good thing is that the UN has come out with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which sets the human rights framework for the operation of business, in particular to respect Indigenous peoples' rights, and for states, reiterating the obligation of states to recognize and protect Indigenous peoples' rights and to provide access to justice to Indigenous peoples. While there are progress done along this line, there are still huge gaps in the actual recognition and exercise of Indigenous peoples in relation to business operations. So we will be having a close look of these issues from the different countries in South Asia. So I would just like to run our speakers before I call them to speak. So we have Durga Manirai, who's an Indigenous lawyer from Nepal. And then we have Zoming Mawi Zailo Amisu from affected communities in Northeast India, Mizoram. We have Mr. Dinesh Murmu, a Santal Adivasi from India, affected by coal mining. And we have Palap Chakma, who's a Chakma from the Chittagong Hill Tracts in Bangladesh, also working on several business. So we have these Indigenous speakers. And then we're happy to hear from Mr. Surya Deva, the member of the Working Group on Business and Human Rights from Asia, who will be presenting to us the action plan for the second decade and its implication to Indigenous peoples. And finally, we will have 3 panel of reactors who are also engaging on the issues of Indigenous peoples and business. So we are privileged to have Martin Oils from ILO Geneva office, Ms. Joytika Kalra from the National Human Rights Commission, and Mr. Navaraj Saptoka. So these are the speakers that will also be presenting their insights on how Indigenous people's rights are going to be protected in business operations, as well as also on mechanisms for access to justice. So with that, I want to start the session with engaging with the participants and to welcome all of you here. So we want to engage with you through a Mentimeter. So may I ask our technical team to explain what this is? But it's more the question for you to answer. So to kick off, our discussion is, in 1 or 2 words, what do you consider as the key challenges of Indigenous peoples in relation to business operations? So may I request the technical team to facilitate this engagement with our participants, please?
Certainly. Thanks so much, Joan. So in just a few moments, what we will do is we will post a link into the chat. There you have it. Go ahead and click the link and you can then answer the question that Joan just put up. So in 1 to 2 words, what do you consider as the key challenges of Indigenous peoples in relation to business operations? We'll give you a few moments to go ahead and click the link in the chat, and then you can answer in 1 or 2 words, what do you consider as the key challenges of Indigenous peoples in relation to business operations?
Okay. Now I see.
Sound officer. Sound 60, no?
Great. Looks like we've got a few responses here. We've got dialogue and partnerships, rights recognition, lack of partnerships, a lot of things on partnership here. Companies refusing to legitimize IPs as key stakeholders, recognition and implementation of FPIC rights, language barriers, culture differences, more FPIC, and FPIC consent in the development projects, as well as meaningful participation and related challenges. And it looks like we have I'm not sure if it's fully appeared there, but it looks like we might have an additional box, but it's only partly displaying here. But Joan, any thoughts on what's just been put up? It's another FPIC. There we go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to this feedback on the question. It's very interesting to know that there are different perspectives in relation to this. So now, thank you for that. We'll take a look after the discussion. We'll go back to this. And can I then request the technical team to now present the video on Indigenous peoples and the UN the business and human rights guiding principles. So can I request the technical team to present the video?
Certainly.
Indigenous Peoples and the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Indigenous peoples' lands, territories and resources are often regarded by the dominant states and businesses as a resource that can simply be taken and exploited.
Traditional Sami lands, they are considered state property.
As Indigenous peoples defend their rights, they are criminalised, marginalised and abused. To address these and other human rights abuses and violations, in June 2011, the United Nations adopted the Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. This is the UNGP. Business can create jobs, growth and infrastructure, but can also engage in corruption, pollution and human rights violations. So it is important to implement the guiding principles to ensure businesses respect human rights. The UNGP is a framework applicable to states and businesses. It clarifies their duties and responsibilities in relation to human rights when doing business. These apply to all states and to all business enterprises, both small and large, local and international. The UNGP consists of 3 pillars: protect, respect, remedy. Protect. The state's duty is to protect against human rights abuses. Respect. Business shall respect and avoid infringing human rights.
Business entities, they should make sure that UNGP should be implemented to make sure that Indigenous people's right is not violated.
Remedy. States and businesses should ensure access to effective remedies for rights violations. Supporting the UNGP. The UNGP is overseen by the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Their mandate is to promote the UNGP, identify good practices, make recommendations for effective remedies, monitor alleged human rights abuses and intervene if necessary, and importantly, guide the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights. The UN Forum on Business and Human Rights is an annual 3-day event. It serves as a global platform for stakeholders to discuss trends and challenges and promote dialogue and cooperation on issues linked to business and human rights. The participation of Indigenous peoples within the forum enables them to advocate for the inclusion of the collective rights enshrined in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Andrew.
И могу сказать, что форум, который проводится ежегодно, форум глобальный форум бизнеса и права человека, на нем голос коренных народов очень-очень громко. Я очень надеюсь, что рабочая группа также продолжит работать по коренным народам, по защите их прав.
The forum enables them to raise awareness on the human rights abuses and violations committed against them, to advance and develop a common position and recommendations, engage directly with members of the working group, network and strengthen solidarity with NGOs and other allies, engage with financial institutions, businesses and states and other relevant actors. It is fundamental that Indigenous peoples engage at the different levels: international, regional and national. Implementing the UNGP, National Action Plans, NAP. These should be developed through a multi-stakeholder platform including Indigenous peoples. An NAP should include commitments by the states on how business will be regulated and how the 3 pillars will be implemented. A decade of UNGP implementation. After 10 years of the UNGP, challenges still remain as the rights of Indigenous peoples continue to be ignored and violated by states and businesses.
For example, on the Norwegian side, there is the Fosen wind power plant, which is, I believe, the biggest wind power park in Europe. And that is built on traditional Sami territories and without consent.
There are some good experience, but there are some not so good experiences on these mines. We want people here have a job, but they don't actually do that. And there's also a lot of environmental issues.
The NAPs in many countries missed the opportunity to address wide-scale violation of human rights, as well as developing policies to implement the standards enshrined in UNDRIP. This includes free, prior and informed consent, FPIC, and the recognition of customary justice systems as part of the remedy pillar.
Nuestros territorios y bosques son vida, no son mercancía. Los pueblos indígenas hemos insistido que nuestros territorios no están a la venta. Las empresas deben cumplir con su debida diligencia y respetar nuestro derecho al consentimiento libre, previo e informado. Asimismo, deben cumplir con los estándares internacionales de derechos humanos en todas sus actividades, incluida su cadena de producción.
However, progress has been made that benefits Indigenous peoples, including voluntary due diligence by businesses, an increase of NAPs with the participation of Indigenous peoples, raised awareness and attention to human rights abuses. There are examples proving that collaboration can work. In Australia, a participation agreement was created between Argyle Diamonds and the Miriwong, Gija, Malning and Woolnar peoples on whose lands an Argyle mine sits. In the Arctic, the Sami people successfully campaigned to have Stora Enso, a multinational paper company, change its wood procurement practices.
Companies often want to maintain some kind of image of being respectful towards human rights, towards indigenous people's rights, environmental standards, and so on. Nowadays, that social media can be used very effectively to mobilize a lot of attention.
Regional and national progress has been seen in Latin American countries with the development of FPIC protocols and judiciary decisions related to human rights abuses by businesses. But it remains a very dangerous environment for human rights defenders. What do Indigenous peoples want over the next 10 years?
What we envision in the next decade of UNGP implementation, a change in the behavior of companies and governments in engaging with Indigenous peoples based on the respect for our rights, our dignity, and our roles as stewards of nature. And we need effective mechanisms for states and companies to be accountable to their human rights obligations. We need states to adopt a legally binding treaty for business to respect human rights as an urgent concern.
There are differences between the hopes related to states, business, and among Indigenous peoples themselves, but there are fundamentals that form the foundation of the cooperation required to achieve a sustainable balance between business, human rights, and Indigenous peoples. So what is it that Indigenous peoples are hoping for? Integration of the UNDRIP in the UNGP implementation, including the proper application of FPIC. Recognise, respect and support community-driven FPIC protocols and guidelines when engaging with Indigenous peoples. Establish effective mechanisms for Indigenous peoples' access to remedy at project, national, regional and global levels, as well as the integration of Indigenous customary justice systems. Conduct outreach for awareness raising on the rights of Indigenous peoples and the UNGP. Establish effective mechanisms for the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples at all levels, especially of women and youth.
Было бы очень важно, чтобы мы, старшее поколение, конечно же, уделяли больше внимания развитию и образованию молодежи, чтобы наша молодежь могла права своих народов на том же уровне, на котором делается и в рамках ООН, и в рамках.
Our greatest hope is for a just, equitable and sustainable world with respect for diversity and the dignity of all its people.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope that that video relates to the two words that the participants have mentioned. There's a, as you can see from the concerns raised by indigenous peoples, the Mentimeter responses actually coincides with it. But anyway, that I think clearly sets the tone of our discussion today on what are now the realities on the ground that still persist in relation to business operations. No, so where we have like I mentioned earlier, speakers from indigenous communities across South Asia. So we will start with our colleague from Bangladesh, Mr. Palap Chakma. Palap, my question to you is, one of the aims of the government of Bangladesh is to attract more tourists in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, which is of course the community of indigenous peoples. And that attraction that they want to do would contribute to the local economy. So they have given their permission for the building of a 5-star Marriott hotel. However, this project was met with opposition and protest by affected indigenous communities and their organizations. As one of the indigenous leaders involved in this issue, can you tell us why affected communities are against this project? Palap?
Yes. Joan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Joan. The issue you raised here, the government, some department of government are trying to establish tourism complex in traditional land of Moro people in Chimbuk Hills in Chittagong Hill Tracts. And in response to this initiative, the indigenous Moro people, they protested against this drive of the concerned business. Actually, there is a private business here, and along with other business, and they also somehow they connected. There is a news in the newspaper, in the media, that some Marriott is somehow connected with this initiative. That's why they are establishing a 5-star hotel in Chimbuk Hills. But without discussing, consulting with the people who are living for generations in that particular land. That's why the indigenous Moro people, so if this particular tourism complex is being implemented, the indigenous Moro people will uproot it from their traditional land. On the other hand, the land which is acquired or planned to acquire, so there is a particular rules and regulations in Chittagong Hill Tracts for acquiring land. It need to obtain prior approval from Hill District Council according to the existing land management policy. So, but the authority did not follow all the procedures of land acquisition. On the other hand, now they are telling about the only 20 acres of land they will use for this tourism complexes. But on the other hand, if we see the huge plan, so they will establish villas, they will establish cable cars. So all this type of huge construction you cannot establish in a small land like the 20 acres of land. So in paper, you are telling the people that you are acquiring 20 acres of land, but on the other hand, there is a huge plan. That's why the indigenous Moro people, they protested it, and they said, if this plan is implemented, tourism complexes implemented, the indigenous Moro people will be uprooted. And in the top of the hills, right now, they are facing the problem of water scarcity. So if that tourism complex is established, definitely their water sources would be used for the tourism complexes, because it also there is a previous experience in right now. There are also few tourism spot which is also owned by some security agency. So they are also using the water source of the indigenous Moro people. That's why they are having water scarcity in their land. So the authority did not obtain did not consult with the community. That's why if this is implemented without the consent and consultation of the local people, their life and their culture would be threatened. That they will be displaced.
Yes. So that means this project is actually violating the rights of indigenous peoples, the Moro, in particular, on their land rights, but also in terms of the resource management, as you mentioned. Water will again serve the tourist more than the needs of the indigenous peoples communities. So with this very serious challenge to the exercise of the rights of indigenous peoples, especially the displacement that it will cause, what actions have you taken to bring this issue at the global level, also of course at the national level? And what has been the response and what's the latest development now on this conflict?
Okay, so at the very beginning, the community, they peacefully organized cultural showdown. Just they protested by showing their music, not even the chanting the slogans. They just cultural showdown. They play their musical instrument, and they wanted to attract the attention of the government that we do not want this type of development in our land. And later they submitted memorandum to the local level, and even the Moro people, for the first time in their life, they came to capital to raise their voice, and they came to the capital city and they submitted memorandum to the Prime Minister. On the other hand, media, civil society, indigenous people organizations, they all tried to raise voice against this type of drive in the Moro people's land. And also, we indigenous people organizations, we communicated with the National Human Rights Commission, and we also advocated and communicated with the regional level human rights bodies, indigenous peoples organizations, including AIPP and other. And this was hugely discussed, and even some human rights organizations, including Survivor, including Amnesty International, they issued consent letter, and they wrote later to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh government not to implement this project. Even UN special mandate holders, I think 5 or 6 mandate holders together, they wrote later to the Bangladesh government not to implement this project without consent of the indigenous Moro people. But in the ground, we do not see any reflection. It's still we came to know from the community that still the construction is going on, but not a very large scale, very small scale. They are going slowly, but they didn't stop.
Okay. Thanks a lot for that, Palap. I think this project illustrates not only what's happening in Bangladesh, but also what's happening in other places where this kind of tourism is being imposed on in indigenous communities without their consent or even participation in planning this kind of activities, that if it's going to benefit them or it's for them, it should include, right? It should include the participation of indigenous peoples in the decision making. But so these are the issues that around this kind of business operations happening in indigenous territories. So thanks a lot, Palap, for grounding us on these real issues that's happening now as we speak. Now we move on to Nepal. We actually have now an indigenous lawyer, Durga Rai, who's been assisting affected communities. So Durga, for work in assisting indigenous communities on projects funded by international financial institutions such as dams and related power transmission lines. What do you consider as the challenges in the conduct of human rights due diligence for these projects, particularly relating to the concerns and well-being of indigenous communities, and how you relate this with existing social and environmental standards of these financial institutions?
Thank you very much, John, for this. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me, John?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for this, John, distinguished participants and fellow panelists. So thank you very much for having me. So yeah, as John indicated, that number of hydropower project and transmission line project are in operation in the territories of the indigenous peoples. There is, of course, huge investment from multilateral development banks, such as World Bank, Asian Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and even from the Chinese bank. But today here, I'm going to talk about the challenges on human rights due diligence, particularly in the context of Marshandi Corridor transmission line that is in operation in the territories of Gurung indigenous peoples in Lamjung district, right? And then, of course, the project has been financed by the European Investment Bank, and Nepal Electricity Authority is implementing the project. So there is no ethic, no consultation, no participation of indigenous peoples when it comes to human rights due diligence, right? Project is actually creating multidimensional impact to the life of indigenous peoples and local communities. They are actually losing their land, they are losing their livelihoods, they are losing their forest, even, and then after that, the communities went through the complaint process to the European Investment Bank's complaint mechanisms. They have filed the complaints in the year 2018, and the complaint mechanism has issued an investigation report in the year 2021, which is in April 2021, that has found massive violation of human rights. And that found the violation of social and environment rules of the bank. And that says it overlooked the effect and impact on indigenous peoples. And it says only 1% of the population in the project areas are attended in the public consultation process. So investigation report has clearly recommended that they have to fulfill obligations. They have to fulfill the requirement of FP. So they need to introduce flexible approach to compensation determination. And they have further recommended that they need to stop financing for the Marshandi Corridor transmission line until the violations are addressed. And they need to ensure the participation of affected community in the compensation determination process. The one important recommendation of this conclusion report is that they need to update corrective environmental and social action plan and monitor the implementation. But NEA and EIB bank management is not willing to implement the FP, right? So the communities are actually putting pressure in the different pressure point for the implementation of the FP. So they are submitting their submission to the Human Rights Commission. They are submitting their submission to concerned Ministry of the Government of Nepal, and they're even talking with the local government people for the implementation of the conclusion report. But those things are not actually helping, right? It's not working well. So when we talk to the EIB Bank management about the implementation of the conclusion report, about the implementation about the AIPPIC, and what they are saying is that it is up to NEA whether to proceed with the AIPPIC process or not. This is totally against the UN guiding principle on business and human rights. So, despite the fact that Nepal is party to ILO Convention and UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples, right? The bank operational policies has clearly recognized the AIPPIC because they are not implementing it. This is serious issues that we have been experiencing. So despite doing this, the project is actually mobilizing the security forces to intimidate the communities and to push the project forward. So I'm going for the recommendation. The recommendation that we'd like to make here is that the Nepal has to develop the National Action Plan on the implementation of the UN Guiding Principle, and they need to implement ILO Convention and UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples, and the IFI, the international financial institutions, should implement their operational policies, right? The bank should actually stop the financing when their borrowers do not comply the operational policies. So they need to establish effective grievance handling mechanisms. Not only that, we all, the indigenous peoples and civil society organizations, the human rights institutions, UN mechanisms should come together to put pressure to the government and corporate sectors to implement UN guiding principle on business and human rights. So I think I should stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Durga. Thanks for covering both the challenges and the recommendations and aligning it to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. What I want you to add a bit is how are women impacted by these projects, and how are they also being involved in the actions taken on these projects? So at least we get to see how women are also being part of this. Just a quick response.
Yeah, indigenous women are also severely impacted, right? Because the health impact issues, the gender impact issues are already caused by the project. Because indigenous women are not actually getting the compensation because, the land is in the name of men, right? So indigenous women have to go to the forest to collect the firewood and everything. So they have very big psychological fear, right? Because of the transmission line. So these are a kind of, the impacts on women that we have assessed. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And also it's good that you have added the dimension where when communities take action, they are being intimidated, and that is part of the problem. When indigenous peoples assert, when we assert our rights over our lands, our civil and political rights are also threatened, right? As you have said, the security forces are mobilized to go against the people that are asserting their rights. So this is another layer, I think, of violation that is happening when people assert their rights in relation to business. So thank you for that presentation. At least we get to see what's happening in Nepal in relation to projects in business projects in indigenous communities. Now thanks again, Durga. Now we move to India. We have Dinesh, who's one of the local leaders. So Dinesh, you are one of the leaders of the Adivasi communities affected by the coal mining activities in Jharkhand, in India. Can you tell us what are the impacts of mining activities, particularly to the rights and well-being of the Adivasi communities, including to indigenous women? Dinesh?
Yes, my language Hindi.
Yes, so we'll kindly move to the interpretation in English. Please use the English channel to
मेरी आवाज
Go ahead.
मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
यस दिनेश, आपकी आवाज आ रही है।
सभी को जोहार।
जोहार।
मैं कमर्शियल खनन से प्राकृतिक खेती और रोजगार में भारी बर्बादी है। कोयला खनन हमारे देश में जहाँ भी हुआ है वहाँ पर लगभग 10,000 एकड़ जमीन अधिग्रहण हुआ है। उस परियोजना से 30 से 40,000 आबादी प्रभावित होती है, लेकिन वहाँ कंपनी द्वारा मात्र 2 या 3,000 लोगों को ही रोजगार दे पाती है, जबकि वहाँ 30 से 35,000 आबादी प्रभावित होती है। भारत देश का कुल 40% खनिज उत्पादन अकेले झारखंड में ही होता है, जो गोड्डा, लातेहार, हजारीबाग आदि जिलाओं में होता है। ये जो हमारा झारखंड में जो हो रहा है, झारखंड सबसे अमीर राज्यों में से एक है। ये गवाह है। ये बड़े पैमाने पर यहाँ का लोगों को भलाई नहीं होती है। हर खनन में अपने साथ विस्थापन को लेकर आता है और उस जमीन पर रह रहे, उस जमीन से खेती और अन्य काम कर रहे, जी रहे लोग अपने रोजगार, अपनी सामूहिकता, अपनी संस्कृति से उजड़ जाते हैं। और हमारे जितने भी मजदूर, किसान, आदिवासी, दलित और महिलाएं बदहल के शिकार हो जाते हैं। ये हमारे इस आंकड़े को हमेशा छुपा के रखते हैं। हमारे सरकार जो वादा करते हैं, ठीक उल्टा उसका नतीजा सरकार का दावा है कि नीलामी में लाखों लोगों को रोजगार मिल रहा है, लेकिन यहाँ रोजगार के नाम पर लोगों को अपना जमीन से खो बैठ रहे हैं। यहाँ जल जंगल जमीन उजाड़ रहे हैं, लाखों जमीन इसमें काट रहे हैं। और ये जमीन यहाँ का जो दलित, आदिवासी, मूलवासी लोग हैं, उनको बहुत ही तेजी से अपना संस्कृति, अपना जो सामाजिक है, जो अपना अधिकार से वंचित रह जाते हैं। जबकि हमारा झारखंड में बहुत सारे ऐसे कानून बने हुए हैं जो आदिवासी को स्वशासन के अधिकार का संरक्षण करते हैं। कई कानून संवैधानिक प्रावधानों को भी उल्लंघन करता है। जो पेशा कानून स्पष्ट रूप से ग्राम सभा को गांव संबंधित निर्णय लेने का प्राथमिक निकाय परिभाषित करती है। समता फैसले ने स्पष्ट रूप से 5वीं अनुसूचित क्षेत्र में ग्राम सरकारी समितियों को खनन करने में अधिकार दिया है। इसके अलावा 2013 के जो अपने ऐतिहासिक फैसले, जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट की लोधा पीठ ने स्पष्ट रूप से कहा है कि खनिज का मालिकाना अधिकार जमीन के मालिकों को होना चाहिए। इसके अलावा वन अधिकार कानून जो 2006 में बना है, उसको ग्राम सभा की सामूहिक संपत्ति के रूप में परिभाषित करता है। साथ ही 25वीं अनुसूची प्रावधानों को अंतर्गत आदिवासी बहुल क्षेत्र में आदिवासियों के कल्याण और विकास को केंद्रित कर किसी भी सरकारी नीति को आवश्यकता अनुसार बदल कर लागू करने का प्रावधान है। केंद्र सरकार ने खनन के क्षेत्र में ग्राम सभाओं के साथ कोयला खदानों की कमर्शियल नीलामी की योजना पर चर्चा करनी भी जरूरी नहीं समझती है। सहमति तो दूर की बात है, व्यावसायिक लूट के लिए कोयला खदानों को खोलना कोयला श्रमिकों के अधिकार को भी कमजोर कर देता है। ये हमारे जो 18 जून 2020 को आत्मनिर्भर किनारे के साथ हमारा सरकार 41 कोयला खदानों को कमर्शियल नीलामी के लिए खोला। इनमें से 9 झारखंड के हजारीबाग में ही ये है, और हर वादों को दाव के तक ठीक उल्टा उसका नतीजा सरकार का दावा है कि इसमें करोड़ों लोगों को रोजगार दे रहे हैं, लेकिन कुछ छन लोगों को रोजगार दे करके अपना मजदूर, आदिवासी, दलित और महिलाओं पर बड़ी मुश्किल का सामना करना पड़ रहा है। ये हमारा अनेक तरह से ये अतिक्रमण कर रहे हैं, विशेष करके जिस जिस जहां पर भी ये कोयला खनन होता है उस क्षेत्र में ना खेती होता है, उस क्षेत्र में ना और कुछ ना पेड़ पौधे उग पाते हैं, उनका डस्ट से या कुछ भी वहाँ खेती नहीं हो पाता है। और इस तरह करके लोगों को वहाँ जीने में बेहाल ना स्वास्थ्य का सुविधा हो, ना शिक्षा का सुविधा हो, ना और किसी अन्य तरह का सुविधा वहाँ सरकार दे पाती है। ये हमारे बहुत सारे ऐसे जल जंगल जमीन से भी विस्थापन होना पड़ रहा है। कृषि आधारित हमारा जो जीवन का शैली है उसको भी ये बुरा असर पड़ रहा है। जो
Yes, yes. Thanks a lot for that, Dinesh. It really provides the picture of what's happening in this kind of mining activities in the territories of the Adivasi. And thanks for highlighting the issue of the promises of employment as a payment, or it's like employment but displacement, and that is really, both are not good choices for indigenous peoples in a way. If you want to be, the condition for being employed is to be displaced. This is a huge sacrifice, and because you said that this is not about just employment, this is about culture, this is about the governance also of the communities, the identity and the values that they have. So Dinesh, what do you recommend as the action to be done by the government and the company in line with supposed to be their commitment and obligation under the UN guiding principles on business and human rights? What should be done to prevent further violation of the rights of the Adivasi communities? Dinesh?
Yes, हिंदी।
दिनेश, वो जॉन कह रही हैं कि आपके हिसाब से क्या किया जाना चाहिए सरकार के द्वारा कि आदिवासियों के जो अधिकार हैं वो सुरक्षित किए जा सके। मतलब कौन कौन से ऐसे काम सरकार द्वारा या अन्य बॉडीज के द्वारा, बिजनेस के द्वारा किए जाएं ताकि आदिवासियों के अधिकार सुरक्षित हो सके।
हालांकि ये झारखंड के हेमंत सरकार ने केंद्र के व्यावसायिक नीलामी को निर्णय के विरुद्ध सर्वोच्च न्यायालय में मामला को दर्ज किया है, लेकिन उनकी आपत्ति केवल इतनी है कि केंद्र ने राज्यों से बिना पूछे चर्चा किए और तुरंत नीलामी कर रही है। तो राज्य सरकार ने तो इस व्यावसायिक खनन को नीलामी के मूल सिद्धांत का समर्थन किया है। इसके लिए विशेष रूप से यहाँ खनन ये होना ही नहीं चाहिए ताकि लोगों को ये सुरक्षित हो सके। और खनन भी हो रहा है तो इससे बहुत सारे ऐसे सरकार का जो नियम है, जो पेशा कानून है, वन अधिकार कानून है, जो CNT एक्ट कानून है, उसके तहत ग्रामीणों का समर्थन लेना चाहिए। यहाँ ये खनन करना चाहते हैं कि नहीं चाहते हैं, ये इस तरह करके ये हमारे यहाँ सरकार रोकना चाहिए। ये बिना कहे पूछे कहीं भी, बिना आदेश के बिना ग्राम सभा के बिना कहीं भी खनन नहीं होना चाहिए। जो क्षेत्र है विशेष करके यहाँ जो लोग आदिवासी मूलवासी जंगलों के बीच में रह रहे हैं और जंगल के बीच में लाखों टन कोयला वहाँ पर मौजूद है और लोग वहाँ का सहमति नहीं है, तो वहाँ पर ये खनन नहीं होना चाहिए। और खनन भी हो तो वहाँ का जो वन अधिकार कानून जो है उसके तहत उनको उसे परमिशन लिया जाए, उस पर सहमति लिया जाए कि यहाँ पर होना चाहिए कि नहीं होना चाहिए। ये सारी चीज सरकार को ध्यान में रख करके ही करना चाहिए। अगर ये सब नहीं, अगर सहमति नहीं जताते हैं तो उस जगह पर ये खनन नहीं होना चाहिए सरकार को, तभी हमारा
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for emphasizing and stressing the point of the the need to have the free, prior, and informed consent of affected communities. I think the other one that you have pointed out, the difference between the national and the local government in terms of respecting human rights of Adivasis is an issue of lack of political coherence, because you said while the state wants to respect the rights, it's the national that is imposing its kind of development agenda. So that is, I think, one area that we should also be asking for the policy coherence, that there should be consistency from national to local level in terms of ensuring the respect and protection of the rights of indigenous people. So thanks for adding that information, because I think it's an important element to emphasize in the commitment of states, that it should be, the obligation of states. So thank you. Thanks a lot for that. And also again, throughout the presentations, what's clear is the issue of the livelihoods of indigenous peoples being impacted, the land rights are being impacted, the marginalization as a result of this kind of projects. And so clearly it's these activities, business activities, are impositions to indigenous peoples. They've never been part of the decision making in this kind of business or development, so-called development interventions in indigenous territories. So now we move to the north part of India. We have Zoming Sailo, who's a Misu. As an indigenous research scholar coming from the communities affected by palm oil plantation in Mizoram, India, how is this agribusiness impacting the affected communities? And are they equal? Is there any form of equitable benefit sharing with these communities when the intention of this project is to bring them development? So, Zomi?
Yes, can you hear me?
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, the indigenous farmers have cultivated oil palm with the hope of having a secure source of income, and also as a means of replacing jhum, which we normally would call shifting cultivation. Well, but the sentiment of the infected community would be that of regret, because most of these farmers have decided to either have already shifted, or they have decided to shift to jhum, or they have decided to remove their oil palm plantations and replace them with other crops like areca nut. Mainly, this is because they are not able to get the income that they have hoped for in the beginning. Well, the price of the fresh fruit bunches of oil palm is sold at rupees 10 per kilogram. And the companies have paid them 55%, and the remaining 45% is paid by the government of Mizoram. But the government is not able to pay to all the farmers the subsidy that has been promised to them. So between 2020 and 2021, only 684 farmers out of 10,843 farmers are provided with the subsidy. And these farmers have to bring their produce to the collection centers that have been set up by the companies at the roadside locations. And most of these plantations are far from the road. And so the farmers have to bring their produce to the roadside locations, to the collection centers. But the process of bringing their produce from their farms to the roadside location is a challenging task, as the bunches are heavy. So the farmers have again have to hire laborers at the cost of rupees 500 per day. So when we calculate all these things, we know that the farmers are not earning enough income from their oil palm plantations. And the government has signed a memorandum of understanding with 3 companies, and these companies are allotted different districts. So out of these 3 companies, only Godrej Agrovet has set up the processing mill. So Godrej is assigned to Kolosip and Mamit districts. So only the farmers belonging to two districts are able to sell their produce to the companies. So these farmers, when they sell their produce to the companies, they do not get the payment at that instant. So they have to wait like a month or sometimes even more than a month to get their payment. So this has created a lot of problem for those farmers who depend solely on oil palm cultivation as their livelihood. And as these farmers are, as these villages are located in remote areas, they do not have banking facilities. So in order to get the payments, they have to travel to distant towns and other villages where banking facilities are available. And also this oil palm, since these oil palm mills are not set up yet, in the remaining 5 districts, these farmers who have planted oil palm are suffering because of it, because they are not the oil palms are not processed, and mostly the farmers belonging to these regions have decided to give up on their oil palms. They have abandoned them. And so we can say that the companies are obliged to buy the fresh fruit bunches even if they are not processing them, and the government still have to pay the subsidies to these farmers. So in a way, we can say that all the parties that are involved in this business are suffering loss. And so we can see that this business, oil palm business, is not benefiting the indigenous farmers.
Because it's really the companies are the one involved in the mill, right, in the processing of the palm oil, and that is where there is very unjust payment and treatment of the sellers. Like you said, the farmers are not paid well, and they get paid late. But and you said that in general now the palm oil kind of activities is not really beneficial to the indigenous farmers or communities. So what are they thinking now? You said in the beginning that they have shifted from Jum or shifting cultivation to palm oil. So what is now? Are they shifting back to Jum farming, or what are the alternatives?
Yes,
and what kind of support do they need to have a more sustainable livelihood?
These farmers have many of the farmers have shifted back to June, and also there are many farmers who have replaced their oil palm plantations with areca nut. So since many farmers, since many areas of lands have been kept for oil palm cultivation, I think there is a need to listen to the constraints that are being faced by these farmers. The government should come up with a solution for these farmers so that they would not lose their lands. And the process of uprooting the oil palm itself is a difficult task. So we have to help these farmers so that they will be able to earn income and from their oil palm.
Okay, yeah. So what's needed now is for the government to provide support for more sustainable livelihoods for the indigenous communities, right?
Yes.
Especially since this kind of production that is being controlled by business in terms of the processing is not benefiting the communities, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and also, if I may ask, if what are there environmental problems related to the palm oil production? And
yes, Mizoram is rich in biodiversity, and so when we lose our forest cover, there is loss of biodiversity. And recently, we have found new species. Like these new species are discovered like just a month ago, right here in the locality where I'm residing. So the same things can how do I say this? So there are many more species to be discovered, I can say, in Mizoram itself. So when we destroy our forests through monoculture crop like oil palm, we are destroying our forests, we are destroying our environment and our biodiversity.
Thank you. That's a very powerful statement. And I think everybody will learn that lesson that once we impose monoculture, we are losing our biodiversity. And it's time to stop that kind of production to support our biodiversity. So thank you very much, Zoming, for that very important presentation on how indigenous farmers are also affected by this kind of agribusiness that is also resulting to the loss of biodiversity. Thank you. So now we have finished our indigenous leaders presenting the realities on the ground in terms of the impacts of business in their communities, and also presenting some of the actions needed to be done by states and companies. So now we will hear from Professor Sorya Deva of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. He cannot join us physically in this, but he has a pre-recorded presentation for this event, and he will be presenting on the action plan for the second decade of implementation of the UNGP and its implication to indigenous peoples. May I request the technical team to please present the video recording? Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Surya Dev. I'm a member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers of this side event at the third UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights to invite me to speak on this particular issue. It's unfortunate that I'm not able to join you in person or live, but I hope these remarks will contribute to the discussion that will be taking place. I would like to focus on three aspects. First, how indigenous peoples are impacted in a differentiated and disproportionate manner about their business activities. Secondly, I will briefly mention about the regulatory initiatives that are unfolding or have been put on the table in the field of business and human rights. And thirdly, I will talk about the next decade of the business and human rights agenda and how that could be relevant for the perspective of the indigenous peoples. Now, in terms of the impacts, I think it is very clear and well documented that indigenous peoples are impacted adversely in a very differentiated and disproportionate manner. The differentiated impact is because they consider land as something not which can be sold like a commodity. Rather, land could be like the mother, and you don't really sell your mother. I think this is a crucial distinction between indigenous peoples and others who may consider land as a commodity which can be sold in the market. In terms of disproportionate impact also, you may see that many of the natural resources are found in places where indigenous peoples have been living for thousands and thousands of years. And in this particular context, the idea of AIPP, free, prior and informed consent, is absolutely vital. Now, when it comes to the regulatory landscape, UN guiding principles have definitely become the key instrument in the business and human rights field in the last 1 decade or so. At the same time, you may notice that UN guiding principles do not expressly talk about the rights of the indigenous peoples. They do not mention ILO 169 or UN DRIP in the context of human rights due diligence. And I think in this light, there is an opportunity that when the other standards are developing, for instance, the Treaty on Business and Human Rights, or the last month, the directive issued by the European Commission on sustainable human rights due diligence, I think in those initiatives, it will be very critical that the voices of indigenous peoples are heard, and those issues about the relevance of AIPP to human rights due diligence is mainstreamed. Going forward in the next decade, I would like to mention 4 issues that deserve greater attention. And that is also part of the roadmap that the working group presented to the Human Rights Council last year. First of all, the participation of indigenous peoples in the human rights due diligence processes is absolutely critical. And I'm consciously using the word participation rather than consultation. I think businesses should kind of co-create this idea of consultation. And unless the human rights due diligence is meaningfully based on the participation of indigenous people, it cannot really be a due diligence that can be regarded legitimate. The second issue that I would like to highlight is climate change. I think the climate change is going to impact all of us, but it may also have significant bearing on how indigenous peoples and their rights and culture is protected going forward. And I think here, indigenous people have a lot to teach the world, all of us, because they have been living in harmony with nature and the planet for many, many years. So they can share their wisdom, and I think we should be willing to learn from them. The third issue is about just transition. I just now mentioned about the climate change. Climate change may also mean that there could be more demand for resources, minerals, mining could be increased, and that could have a negative impact on the rights of indigenous peoples. And I think in this particular context, the idea of a just transition is crucial. My last point is human rights defenders. Indigenous peoples, when they're protesting against projects all over the world, they are criminalized, they're beaten, they're arrested, and in some cases, they also face the fatal consequences of death. This must stop. And of course, all the actors, states, businesses, investors, international financial institutions, academia, lawyers, all of us have to work together to ensure that these are the red lines, and indigenous peoples who are protecting their legitimate interests and rights are not criminalized anymore. So thank you very much once again for the opportunity. And I very much hope that this side event builds the momentum further in protecting and preserving the rights of the indigenous peoples. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's a very concise presentation from Professor Soria in capturing how the UN guiding principles, particularly the roadmap, should address the issues of indigenous peoples. Just to pick up two of that I want to highlight from what he mentioned. One is the stewardship role of indigenous peoples in conservation and management of resources, which is of course, a critical contribution of indigenous peoples that should be recognized when we talk of sustainable development or addressing climate change. And the second is the issue of human rights defenders. And that is a growing problem across Asia. When indigenous peoples assert our land rights, we are arrested, detained, and some even killed. But even more is the problem of lack of access to justice. When these things happen, there's no access to justice to many of the victims. So we hope that the issue of access to justice will also be addressed with clear mechanisms in the second decade of the implementation of the UNGP. So with that, we're actually now also moving to reactions, responses, insights, and reflections from our allies, if I may say, the members of human rights commissions in Nepal and India, and also from ILO, to share their reflections on the presentations, as well as what also inform us on what their respective office are doing in relation to supporting the promotion and protection of the rights of indigenous peoples. So we would like to start with Mr. Navaraj Sapkota from the department. He's the department head of the Collective Rights Division of the Nepal National Human Rights Commission. So Mr. Nava. You have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to comment upon these some of the deliberation, some of the presentation that has been made by the speakers. They were very much insightful and interesting presentations, and most of the presentations highlighted that free, prior, and informed consent is one of the challenges in business related human rights to the indigenous people in various countries. This was the first challenge that they have highlighted. And next one is the how can we ensure the meaningful participation of the indigenous people, indigenous communities in the developmental project without any problem. That was the second thing that was highlighted during the presentation. And even in the case of India, the farmers issue was also highlighted. And I would just like to highlight some of the business and human rights related interventions and roles that has been played by the NHRC Nepal with reference to the indigenous right. When while we monitor the different cases related with the indigenous right and that are overlapping to the business related right, some of the impacts on human rights have been seen. The first impact we have seen is the right to an adequate standard of living. That is the first interesting right. And the second one is the right to just in favorable working condition. That is the second impacted area. And the third one is the right to water and sanitation. This is not the very much highlighted issue in the previous presentation, but water is the one of the very much important resources. And due to the various developmental projects, the water resources are also disappearing in the context of Nepal. Therefore, I would like to highlight this issue too. And right to education, obviously this is one important issue. And the next important issue is right to access to information. This is also impacted in the developmental related project and the other business related activities. And non-discrimination, that is also highlighted by the other speakers too. Therefore, I don't want to explain this. And the development of infrastructure, this is another area, and like to labor and indigenous people's rights are also impacted by the business related activities in Nepal. Yeah. Then what role NHRI, as an NHRC Nepal has been playing can be the one of the interesting area to the all the participants. And NHRI are obviously, you all know, established as per the Paris principles of human rights, and they can promote and protect the human rights autonomously and independently from the government, as we are doing in the context of Nepal. And we do have the adequate power of investigation as well as the monitoring of the right violation cases. And we do have the mandate to direct or to instruct the government to compensate and take actions on the right violation cases and the reporting obligation. And how we are working with the business related human rights related cases is that we are receiving the complaints, and we also launch the complaint on Sumoto, and we are advocating and taking some of the dialogues with the relevant concerned agencies. And we are also working with the partnership with the various indigenous rights organization as well as Laurnip and other indigenous working organizations are also partners for us, and we are monitoring and investigating the cases, and we are also settling few of the cases with the mediation. I would like to share afterward. And we are also taking initiation to the plan and policy reform, and few of the publications have been also launched. In advocacy and dialogue, we have recommended the government of Nepal to ratify the Convention of the Rights of Migrant Workers and their families, as we are the labor migration sending countries. We are the country of origin. Therefore, the migrant workers and their families have been facing lots of problem in the destination countries too. Therefore, the NHRC Nepal has already recommended the government to ratify the Convention on Rights of the Migrant Worker. And we have also initiated various dialogues with the human rights defenders that are working on the rights of indigenous people and various community level organizations. And we have also the dialogue with Federation of Chamber of Commerce Nepal, Hotel Association of Nepal, and the other business and human rights related organization on the various indigenous rights issues that are related with the business and human rights. And we are also working with the partnership on the awareness raising and monitoring of the situation of indigenous people. And we are also monitoring in partnership with various organizations of the rights of the indigenous population affected by the business sector. And a few of the complaints have been received and they have been already settled, and a few of the complaints have been still ongoing investigation. And we have also issued various press statements. And one of the very important issue I would like to tell you that one of the compensation issue to the sugarcane farmer at the various districts of Tarai, that the compensation was not provided by the sugar mill. That was the one of the very important, and that can be the interesting issue to you all. And the one of the important another case is the health issue, that was disturbance by the house flies that were produced by the by a big poultry farm at the eastern part of Nepal, and that was also settled in collaboration with the National Human Rights Commission, and other issues are also listed here. I would not like to reiterate. And we are also monitoring the banking sector from the JC perspective.
Sir Nava, may I request you to, because we're running out of time and we still have two speakers.
Yeah, okay, please. And one important mediation issue was the 220 kV Khimti transmission line of hydropower project, and the indigenous peoples were struggling and various groups were formed. And that was the one of the settled case by the mediation by the NHRC. And plan and policy issues, we have recommended on various issues to the government for the protection of economic, social, and cultural rights of the indigenous people, and displacement-like issues. And thank you very much for the time. Okay.
Yes, thanks a lot, Mr. Nava. I mean, thanks, Nava, for that. It's very informative, and I think it's important for our participants to know the mandate and the work also of the National Human Rights Commissions in upholding the protection of the rights of indigenous people. So thanks for your commitment to contribute to the recognition and advancement of the rights of indigenous peoples. Thank you for that. Now we move to
thank you, John, for giving me this
opportunity. Kalra from the National Human Rights Commission of India. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, John. And thanks for giving me this opportunity to be part of this deliberation. It's a very important subject, indigenous people, you know, because although I would like to make a mention of the fact that in India, the government of India doesn't recognize anybody as group as an indigenous people. Rather, government of India recognizes ethnic groups as scheduled tribes. And for that reason, there are about 705 ethnic groups who have been identified as scheduled tribes. And there is a Scheduled Tribe Commission also. There is a constitutional body which is meant for the protection of the scheduled tribes, mainly to safeguard the ethnicity and to protect their habitats and to ensure that they are able to live the life they wish to live. But I would like to add some of my personal experiences. In recent past, in India, there was a movie, Jai Bhim, and that movie was based on the lives of tribal. And when I watched that movie, I found that tribals are also very much keen to be part of the mainstream. They are like, they want to be educated. They want to be, the children to be educated and do good jobs and earn good money. So that concept has already there in the minds of the tribals. So when we are talking about business and human rights and rights of tribals, I think the most important job or the most important work would be to ensure that the tribals, they get good quality education. The children get good quality.
I think we have
consent.
Okay.
That would be possible, and they would be able to participate in the business activities only when they are skilled, when they are enabled. I mean, they should participate, they should be part of, because as far as I know, whenever there is a developmental project, I mean, it comes along with the displacement policy also. It comes along with the skill development policy, as it was also being mentioned by, I think, Mr. Dinesh also, that the government claims that we have given jobs to so many people, but in fact, the jobs are not so given. My point is, every project comes on paper, at least, it comes with that that part of that component that about the rehabilitation and mainstreaming. But yes, that can really become a reality when the tribal people in India also trained and skilled to be able to enjoy those jobs and to be able to perform those jobs. And then finally, I would like to share in July 2021, the National Human Rights Commission, in one of its core group meeting, had given the recommendations, and I'm just repeating them, that development projects should be examined from the point of view of the livelihood of displaced persons, as well as its social and environmental impact. Rehabilitation of the displaced person due to development projects should be fully drawn out before the implementation of the project. Rights of the crematorium worker, rack pickers, nomadic people into various vocations should be ensured. Wages to the women workers at par with the men in informal sector should be ensured. Define the trans rights to keep check on the torture and human rights violation of the trans people. Inclusion of mental health in every aspect of rights and treatment gaps to be reduced. Ensure free medical checkup and treatment of informal workers, or like the indigenous workers affected by the work and health hazard, I mean, because of the development projects. And there should be a tendency to treat the urban poor as encroachers, just as Adivasis in forests should be discouraged. I mean, when you're talking about the it's called as Jal Jangal Zameen. The Adivasis are not cannot be treated as encroachers in the urban land. And that had been the judgment, that is the basic genesis, that Adivasis living in jungle, they are the first owner of that land. So this is what the commission is doing, and this is there are multiple cases before the commission dealing with the displacement of the people, or wherever the displacement has not been dealt properly. All the participants were focused, they touched upon the particular subjects of their area. It was a particular and focused deliberation. I think with more efforts, and even the remedies were also discussed, with consistent efforts, the rights of the displaced people can be ensured. It has to be consistent and continuous efforts. Thank you so much, John, and all the participants.
Thank you. Thank you also for highlighting the good work that you've been doing so far in relation to supporting the issues of human rights of indigenous peoples in India. Now, I want to give the floor now to Martin, because he has to leave in 5 minutes. So Martin, please.
Thank you so much, Joanne, and very good to see you all, many of whom are good colleagues, and we are in touch on many issues. So this is a very good opportunity to discuss these important issues. I think I can be relatively concise. A lot of has been said that is very important, and with regard to the guiding principles, I think from the ILO's perspective, we would like to emphasize, also the state's role in this, in all of this. So Obviously, business enterprises also have the responsibilities, but these are two distinct roles, and we need to emphasize both, and not mix them up also, because it's very important that we put into place, in the countries, the institutions, the laws, the procedures that are needed to respect the rights, and that provide a framework for everybody to promote the realization of these rights, and including for private sector to live up to their responsibilities, because accountability needs to be built from bottom up, and then also when we have those institutions, laws and procedures in place, that we enforce them properly. We have heard today that it's not only the absence of a clear framework, but it's also not the non-respect for national legislation that is there. And for that, we need to also promote accountability, stronger judicial systems, the rule of law, and the sort. In this particular part of the world, we have a Convention 107 regarding indigenous and tribal populations, which is ratified by very big countries in the regions. And as a matter of those conventions, there is not a difference between indigenous and tribal peoples and how we refer to these groups. Convention 107, which is ratified by Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, for instance, have very strong protections in regard to land rights, and also with regard to the principle, of prior and informed consent in the case of displacement. Now, that's a principle that is very strong in the convention as well. And obviously, it's not an absolute right and it's not an absolute principle, but there needs to be something there to make sure that it's implemented, and that whenever exceptions are being made, that those remain within the remits of national and international standards on the matter. So this is very strong. The second comment I wanted to make really is that much more also than, in addition to the governance rights, respect and protection of land rights, respect and protection of the rights to be consulted, to participate with a view to reaching agreements and consent, so that we have also this issue of the contribution of the communities to inclusive, sustainable development, and this shift to local when we speak about resilience, when we speak about sustainable development, where indigenous peoples can play a role, not only in terms of protecting the environment and playing their role as guardians, but also as economic actors in their own right, relying on their own assets in terms of traditional knowledge, the land, and so on. So, and this is where I think the words of partnership and dialogue come in, how business actors and indigenous communities can work together to create this sort of projects that are mutually beneficial, create benefits and employment that is in line with also the aspirations of those concerned. So this is really where also local actors have to play a role. And in this regard, the ILO, of course, we are tripartite. We have also the workers and employers organizations part of our structure. So I think the issue of social dialogue and indigenous people's partnership with those actors will be also very important in the future to move on with regard to these issues. And I really want to thank you all for this. And obviously we will have hopefully soon other opportunities to continue these important discussions. Thank you very much, and back to you, John.
Wow, thank you, Martin. That's actually a very good way of concluding the discussion now, reiterating the obligations of states, but also, and I like the term that you use, that indigenous peoples are also economic actors, and that they can actually contribute to development in a sustainable way, also being the stewards of nature. So I think those are important messages that we get in this discussion. And I hope we will have more discussions later also in relation to how can we have access to justice when problems arise, how do we address them so that they're not repeated, right? So I think that would be the next level of discussion that we will have later, but the time is up. So I want to express our gratitude to all the speakers in this session. It's a very enriching discussion where we have touched the realities on the ground, but also importantly, what needs to be done on this issue of indigenous people's rights in relation to business, and the contributions also from our reactors in terms of what they're doing is also encouraging for us to advance this concern. So, Carl, do we still have time to do a Mentimeter before we close?
I'm afraid we are fresh out of time. We're just over
all
our
right.
planned time.
Yeah, we're supposed to ask what are your two key recommendations that needs to be done, right? As our takeaway from this, but sorry, there's no time. We also did not have time for Q&A, but please feel free to get in touch with us, with the Indigenous People's Rights International, as well as to the speaker. So thanks to all of you, and now I give it back to Carl. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joan, and thank you so much to all of our speakers as well. That was just a really fantastic set of examples and points and insights that were brought to the discussion. Now, we have a whole variety of interesting side sessions as part of the 3rd UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights, as you know, and coming up next, we still have 2 sessions on corporate capture and addressing human rights through collective action in South Asia. Those sessions will be starting in about half an hour. So if you are able to join us, that would be fantastic. You can have a look at the detailed agenda and, of course, the agenda for our plenary sessions coming up next week at the SAF-BHR.com website. But in the meantime, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.